The earth remembers those who respect it, but city folks, they forget where everything comes from. I should have known better the day she stepped onto my porch in those ridiculous high heels, sinking into the soft wood I'd polished that very morning. Mother Williams, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. James has told me so much about you in this charming little farm. Her name was Victoria. My son's eyes followed her every movement like she'd cast a spell on him. I'd raised that boy alone after his father passed, worked these fields with my bare hands to put him through college. And there he was, bringing home this polished city woman who looked at my home, our generations-old farmhouse, with what I now recognize was thinly veiled disgust. I remember wiping my hands on my apron, calloused from decades of honest work, before extending them to her. She hesitated just for a split second, but it was enough. I saw it. Still, I smiled and welcomed her. Any woman my James loves is welcome in our home, I said, meaning every word. That evening, I prepared my special apple pie, the one James always said reminded him of childhood summers. Victoria took one bite and set her fork down. Oh, it's rustic. I usually avoid sugar these days. It's not really good for the complexion, you know? But it's so sweet you made the effort. James didn't notice how her words cut me. He just laughed and said, "Mom's pie is famous around here." "Vicky, I'm sure it is," she replied, patting his hand while giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, as I was clearing the dishes, I overheard her whisper to him, "Babe, do you think your mom could use some help modernizing this place? It's all so outdated." The wooden spoon in my hand nearly snapped. This house told our family's story through every scratch and dent. But I kept quiet. For James. I crawled into bed that night with an unfamiliar heaviness in my chest. Something felt wrong, like storm clouds gathering over a field you just planted. But the way she looked at my home, my life's work, my memories, that was just the first warning sign of the hurricane to come. The morning after they announced their engagement, I found myself alone in the kitchen, clutching my late husband's coffee mug. Frank had been gone 15 years, but in moments like these, his absence felt fresh as yesterday's rain. "What would you think of her, Frank?" I whispered to the empty chair where he used to sit. "Am I being unfair? The wedding plans consumed everything. Victoria wanted a sophisticated ceremony, nothing like the simple country weddings our community had celebrated for generations. When I suggested using the old oak tree where James's father and I had exchanged our vows, Victoria laughed. "Oh, Martha, that's so quaint. But we've already booked the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown. It's where all the important ceremonies happen." Important. As if our traditions meant nothing. James was changing too. My son, who once spent Sunday afternoons helping me garden, now checked his phone constantly, always rushing back to the city, to her world. "Mom, Victoria's family has connections. This wedding is important for my career too," he explained when I expressed concern about the mounting costs. One evening, as I was showing Victoria my wedding album, hoping to find some common ground, she barely glanced at it. "Black and white photos are so limited, aren't they?" she said, scrolling through her phone instead. "Our photographer uses this amazing filter that makes everything look vintage, but, you know, in a stylish way." I closed the album, tucking away memories she deemed worthless. The worst came when James mentioned they wouldn't be using the family quilt I'd been saving for his marriage bed, a tradition spanning 5 generations. "Victoria has sensitive skin. Mom, she's already ordered this hypoallergenic bedding set." That night, I sat alone on my porch swing, the quilt wrapped around my shoulders, each stitch containing prayers from mothers before me. For the first time since Frank died, I felt truly alone. My garden, usually my sanctuary, offered little comfort. The tomatoes needed picking, but what was the point? Who would eat them now? My son, who once savored every homegrown vegetable, now preferred the pre-washed, plastic-packaged produce Victoria bought. I was losing him. Not suddenly, but in small pieces, like soil washing away in a steady rain. But I had no idea that my kindness, my silent acceptance of each small heartbreak, was being mistaken for weakness, or that it would soon be used as a weapon against me. The wedding came and went like a storm that leaves everything changed in its wake. I sat in the front row, of course, but somehow felt miles away from my own son's happiness. Victoria's family, sleek, polished city people with sharp smiles, dominated the event. Her father's toast mentioned James's potential, as though my son was a project to be developed, not a man I'd raised to be kind and true. When they returned from their honeymoon in Europe, Victoria announced they would be living just 20 minutes from my farm, close enough for James to check in on me. I was grateful, foolishly thinking we might build a relationship after all. One Sunday I prepared a welcome dinner. Everything from my garden, everything made by hand. I even used the fine china that had been my mother's. Victoria arrived carrying store-bought dessert. "Just in case," she whispered to James, thinking I couldn't hear. You know how traditional cooking can be. Still, I embraced her, determined to be the mother-in-law I never had. After dinner, Victoria asked to see old photos of James. I brought out the albums, my heart warming as we turned pages of my son's life. Then she spotted the small jewelry box where I kept my most precious possessions. "What lovely antiques," she said, opening it without asking. Her fingers found my mother's brooch, a simple silver piece with a small pearl. Nothing fancy, but priceless to me. "This is charming," she said, pinning it to her expensive blouse. "Vintage accessories are so in right now." I froze, unsure how to respond. It wasn't a gift. She'd just taken it. James noticed my expression. "Mom, you don't mind, right?" "It looks beautiful on Victoria." What could I say? That this stranger was wearing my mother's brooch? That some things aren't meant to be fashion statements? Instead, I smiled. Of course not. The next week, Victoria posted pictures online wearing my mother's brooch at some fancy city event. "Loving this vintage find?" she wrote, as if she'd discovered it in a boutique, not from her mother-in-law's sacred memories. When I gently asked for it back during their next visit, explaining its sentimental value, Victoria looked surprised. "Oh, I thought it was a gift. James said you never wear it anyway." She removed it carelessly, nearly dropping it. "It's a bit outdated, honestly, but I was trying to be nice." Later, I overheard her tell James, "Your mother seems so attached to things. It's a bit concerning, that hoarding mentality." Hoarding. My few precious mementos, my lifetime of careful preservation, reduced to a psychological flaw. That night, holding my mother's brooch, I realized the truth that had been nagging at my heart. The sweet, polite woman my son had introduced me to was a carefully constructed facade. Behind it lurked someone entirely different, someone who took what wasn't offered and reshaped the truth to suit her needs. And in that moment, I understood she wasn't who she pretended to be. The seasons changed, but the growing distance between my son and me cut deeper than any winter chill. James's visits became less frequent, always with an excuse attached. The farm he once couldn't wait to return to was now just an obligation, a check mark on his busy calendar. "Victoria's planning a dinner with her boss," he'd say. Or, "We've got this charity event Victoria thinks is important for networking." Victoria. Always Victoria. When they did visit, she'd inspect my home with critical eyes. "Have you thought about getting some help around here, Martha? A woman your age shouldn't be maintaining all this alone." As if my capability, my independence, was suddenly a liability now that I'd passed 60. I'd find her reorganizing my kitchen cabinets or suggesting I replace the handmade curtains Frank's mother had sewn. "Just trying to help modernize things a bit," she'd say when caught, that saccharine smile never reaching her eyes. The phone calls changed too. Once James would call just to check in, to tell me about his day or ask for a recipe. Now Victoria was always there, on speakerphone, interjecting before I could fully answer his questions. "Actually, James is trying that keto diet I told you about, Martha, so we're avoiding carbs. Your potato recipes will have to wait." My words, my wisdom, my place in my son's life, all gradually erased by her constant presence. Then came Christmas. For 30 years, James had spent Christmas Eve at the farm. It was our tradition, hot chocolate by the fireplace, reading The Night Before Christmas the same way we had since he was small. But that year, a text message came instead of my son. "Sorry, Mom. Victoria's parents booked a ski lodge for the holiday. Maybe we can do something after New Year's? Love you." I sat alone that Christmas Eve, the book unopened on my lap, the 2 mugs of cocoa growing cold. Outside, the snow fell on the silent farm, covering everything in white. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the walls of silence building between us. Things I couldn't say for fear of pushing him further away. Truths he couldn't see because love had blinded him. I'd raised a son who valued honesty above all else, who could spot a lie from miles away. But he couldn't or wouldn't see what was happening right before his eyes. Victoria had become his entire world, his new truth, and I was just a relic of a past he was quickly leaving behind. In the quiet of my farmhouse, surrounded by generations of memories that suddenly seemed to belong to strangers, I felt the foundation of my world shifting beneath my feet. And what I feared most in the depths of my heart was finally happening. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the farm but no warmth to the growing coldness between us. Victoria had stopped pretending now, at least when James wasn't in the room. It began during Easter dinner. I'd spent days preparing, hoping to revive our family traditions. Victoria arrived wearing a sophisticated city dress that made my carefully ironed Sunday best look hopelessly provincial. "Martha," she said, not Mom or even Mother Williams anymore. "We brought wine. Something actually drinkable. Not that sweet local stuff you usually serve." James laughed, missing the insult entirely. "Vicky's been taking wine appreciation classes. She's practically an expert now." Throughout dinner, Victoria corrected me, my grammar, my opinions, even how I'd set the table. "The salad fork goes on the outside." "Martha," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Basic etiquette. When I brought out my mother's recipe for deviled eggs, James's favorite, Victoria pushed hers aside. "I've been meaning to tell you we're trying to avoid processed foods. Those mayonnaise brands you use are just full of chemicals." "It's homemade mayonnaise," I said quietly. "Like I've always made it." Victoria rolled her eyes when James wasn't looking. "Well, how would anyone know that? It's not like you label things properly." After dinner, James went to help our elderly neighbor Mr. Peterson with a fallen branch. The moment he left, Victoria's facade dropped completely. She wandered through my living room, picking up family photos. "You know, Martha, James feels obligated to come here. All these reminders of his simple upbringing make him uncomfortable now." My hands shook as I cleared the dishes. "My son has never been ashamed of where he comes from." Victoria laughed, a cold, clipped sound. "People change. He's moving in different circles now, thanks to my family's connections. This farm, these traditions, they're holding him back. Surely you want what's best for him." When James returned, I was fighting back tears. He noticed immediately. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay?" Before I could speak, Victoria touched his arm. "Your mother's upset because I offered to help digitize these old photos. She thinks I'm trying to erase your memories, but I'm just trying to preserve them in a way that's not deteriorating in these old albums." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that James believed it instantly. "Mom, that's actually really thoughtful of Victoria. Why are you upset about that?" I looked between them, my son, concerned but irritated at my apparent ingratitude, and Victoria, a mask of innocent concern hiding her triumphant smile. "I'm just tired," I managed to say. "Don't mind me." That night after they left, I tried calling James to tell him the truth. Victoria answered his phone. "He's in the shower," she said. "Look, Martha, these little attempts to create drama are transparent. James and I talked on the drive home, and he agrees you seem to be having trouble adjusting to not being the only woman in his life. Perhaps you should consider therapy." When I finally spoke to James the next day, he was distant, defensive. "Victoria's really trying, Mom. Why can't you meet her halfway?" But what she did next shattered what little remained of my already broken heart. The community center had been my sanctuary for 20 years. Every Wednesday, I taught quilting classes to local women, a tradition passed down through generations. It was my way of keeping our heritage alive, of belonging to something bigger than myself. Victoria had never shown any interest in my little hobby, as she called it. So I was surprised when she announced she and James would attend our annual quilting exhibition. "I think it's time I learned more about your crafts," she said with that plastic smile. "James says you're quite respected for them." I was touched by the gesture, foolishly hoping this might be an olive branch between us. I spent weeks finishing my entry, a quilt depicting the history of our farming community, every stitch infused with memories and meaning. The day arrived, and the community center was filled with neighbors and friends. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Martha Williams, not just James's outdated mother. Victoria arrived in a designer outfit that made every other woman in the room suddenly touch their simple dresses self-consciously. James followed, looking uncomfortable in a suit too formal for our country gathering. "Martha," Victoria called loudly, air kissing near my cheeks. "This is all so rustic." "Like stepping back in time, isn't it, darling James?" Several of my friends exchanged glances. Victoria's condescension was unmistakable. As the exhibition began, each quilter explained the meaning behind their work. When my turn came, I spoke of the landmarks depicted in my quilt: the old mill, the first schoolhouse, the oak tree where generations had been married. Victoria's phone kept chiming during my presentation. Instead of silencing it, she answered texts, occasionally showing the screen to James with a smirk. Then came the judging. My quilt won first place, a recognition that normally would have filled me with quiet pride. As I accepted the blue ribbon, Victoria's voice carried across the now silent room. "Well, I suppose everyone gets a turn. Though I'm surprised the judge didn't prefer something a bit more contemporary. These traditional designs are rather outdated, aren't they? Almost museum pieces." The judge, Mrs. Abernathy, who'd taught me quilting 40 years ago, flushed with embarrassment. "What Victoria means," James jumped in, "is that Mom's work is so classic, timeless." But Victoria wasn't finished. As people gathered to congratulate me, she loudly announced, "James and I are redecorating. We're going for a modern minimalist look. No room for quilts and doilies and all these country trinkets. But maybe we can find some space in a guest closet for your ribbon, Martha." The room went silent. Everyone had heard. My friend Eleanor squeezed my arm supportively. "Your work is beautiful, Martha," she said pointedly. Some people wouldn't recognize true craftsmanship if it was wrapped around their cold shoulders. Later, as we shared refreshments, Victoria managed to spill punch on my quilt. "Oh dear," she said, dabbing at it roughly. "Red on white. That's going to stain. Should have used more practical colors, Martha." James pulled her away, finally sensing something was wrong. I heard him whisper, "Vicky, what's going on with you today?" "I'm just tired of pretending her little projects are anything special," she hissed back, not quietly enough. "You're too caught up in guilt to see how pathetic all this is." I stood frozen, punch soaking through generations of tradition, hearing my son say nothing in my defense. That night, after they'd gone, I carefully cleaned my quilt with trembling hands. The stain wouldn't come out completely, a permanent reminder of this day. I folded it away and sat on my porch swing until dawn. Something inside me forever changed. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never again allow someone to make me feel small in the place where I had always belonged. The months after the quilting exhibition blurred together in a fog of painful silence. James's calls became less frequent, his excuses more elaborate. When we did speak, Victoria was always there, monitoring our conversations like a prison guard. Then came the news that broke me. They were selling my grandparents' land. The 20 acres adjoining my farm had been in our family for generations. When James's father died, we had struggled financially, but I'd refused to sell that land. Instead, I'd worked extra jobs, saved every penny, and eventually signed it over to James for his future. "It's your heritage," I'd told him. Some things are worth more than money. He had promised to treasure it. But now, Victoria had convinced him it was just sitting there, and they could use the cash for investments. James called on a Tuesday to tell me. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but Victoria's influence was stronger than his conscience. Mom, it makes financial sense. That land hasn't been worked in years. Because it was waiting for you, I whispered. For your children someday. Victoria took the phone. Martha, this sentimental attachment to dirt is exactly what's holding James back. The developer is offering well above market value. Developer. They weren't just selling it. They were selling it to be carved up, built upon, erased. At least come discuss it with me first, I pleaded. This land has been in our family since pioneer days. Yes, we know, Victoria interrupted. The papers are already signed, Martha. We're just calling as a courtesy. I felt something inside me crack, not like a twig underfoot, but like an ancient oak finally succumbing to disease, splitting down to its roots. 2 days later, surveying equipment appeared on the land. I walked out to the property line and stood watching as men in bright vests hammered stakes into earth that had nourished my family for generations. One of them approached, clipboard in hand. Ma'am, you'll need to step back. This is private property now. Private property. Land that had witnessed my first steps, James's first words, my husband's last breath, reduced to a transaction, a notation on some corporation's balance sheet. That evening, Eleanor came by with a pie and found me sitting motionless on the porch. Martha, have you eaten today? I couldn't remember. Food had lost its taste. Eleanor stayed, force-feeding me like a child, making me tea. When she asked what happened, the whole story poured out, not just the land, but everything, the brooch, the isolation, the public humiliation, Victoria's systematic campaign to erase me from James's life. Have you told James how you feel? She asked gently. He doesn't hear me anymore, I said. He only hears her, Eleanor sighed. You've always been the strong one, Martha, the one who holds everyone up. But sometimes the strongest trees fall the hardest. After she left, I went to James's childhood room, preserved exactly as he'd left it for college. I sat on his bed, touching the baseball trophies, the books we'd read together, the quilt I'd made when he had pneumonia at 10. For the first time since Frank died, I allowed myself to collapse completely. My sobs echoed through the empty farmhouse, grief flowing unchecked like floodwaters breaching a dam. In the depth of that despair, I found myself talking to Frank as if he were beside me. I've lost him, I whispered. She's taken our boy. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would no longer fight to be included in a life where I was clearly unwelcome. I would step back, preserve what dignity remained to me, and accept that my son had chosen his path. But even in my darkest hour, I could not have imagined that divine justice works in mysterious ways. Chapter 8. The partial revelation a month passed in solitude. I threw myself into my garden, finding peace in the rhythms of the earth that had sustained my family for generations. The land that remained was still mine to nurture. Then came the call that changed everything. Mrs. Williams? An unfamiliar female voice. This is Sarah from Willowbrook Real Estate. I'm calling about the Henderson property that borders your farm. The developers were calling me now, to rub salt in the wound. I have nothing to say about it, I replied stiffly. Actually, Mrs. Williams, I'm calling because there's been an irregularity with the sale. Your signature was required as a co-holder of the mineral rights, according to county records. Without it, the sale isn't valid. My heart stopped. Frank had insisted on that clause decades ago, that mineral rights would always remain jointly held, with both signatures required for any transfer. But the sale went through, I said. They've already started surveying. Yes, and that's the problem. We've discovered that your signature on the transfer documents, well, it doesn't match your signature on file with the county. A forgery. They had forged my signature. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone trembling in my hand. I never signed anything, I whispered. That's what we suspected, Mrs. Williams. The company is halting development pending investigation. Would you be willing to come to our office to make a formal statement? After hanging up, I sat motionless, piecing together what this meant. Had James known? Had he allowed this deception, or had Victoria acted alone? Later that afternoon, as I was weeding the tomato beds, a car roared up my driveway. James's car, dust billowing behind it. He slammed the door and strode toward me, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "Mom, what did you say to the real estate company?" "They've frozen everything!" I stood slowly, brushing soil from my hands. I told them the truth. I never signed those papers. "There must be some mistake," he insisted. "Victoria handled all the paperwork. She said you'd agreed. Did you see me sign anything, James? Did we ever discuss this face to face?" His expression changed as realization dawned. She said you were emotional about it but had come around. That you signed the papers when she visited you alone." "When was Victoria ever here alone, James?" He paled. She said, "She drove out one morning while I was at work. Said you two had tea and talked it through woman to woman. That never happened." My voice remained steady, though my heart was racing. "I haven't seen Victoria without you in months." James ran his hands through his hair, his world visibly tilting on its axis. "This doesn't make sense. Why would she lie about something so serious?" "Why don't you ask her?" I suggested quietly. His phone was already ringing in his hand. I could hear Victoria's voice on the other end, shrill with indignation. "Your mother's clearly confused, James. She's getting older, forgetting things. Remember how she couldn't find her glasses last time we visited? They were right on her head." James looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. "Mom doesn't forget things, Victoria, and she wouldn't forget signing away her family's land." After he left, I sat on the porch swing, emotions swirling like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. I hadn't wanted truth to come at such a price. I hadn't wanted my son to learn about betrayal from someone he loved. Yet as the sun set over the fields my family had tended for generations, I felt the first stirring of vindication. The mask was beginning to slip, revealing glimpses of the true face beneath. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, the weight of unspoken truths finally beginning to lift from my shoulders. I couldn't have known then that this was just the beginning, that what seemed like a crack in Victoria's perfect facade was about to become a chasm. Chapter 9, The Witness 3. Days passed with no word from James. I tried to focus on my routines, feeding the chickens, tending the garden, preparing preserves for the winter ahead. But my mind kept returning to the look on his face when he realized he'd been deceived. On the fourth day, a familiar truck rumbled up my driveway. Eleanor stepped out, followed by a young woman I didn't recognize. "Martha," Eleanor called. "There's someone here you need to meet." The young woman approached hesitantly. She was maybe 30, professionally dressed but with kind eyes that seemed vaguely familiar. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Rebecca Thorne. I used to work with Victoria at Meridian Publishing." Eleanor nodded encouragingly. "Tell her what you told me, Rebecca." Rebecca twisted her hands nervously. "I saw your picture in Eleanor's shop, the one of you and your son at last year's Harvest Festival. I recognized him immediately as Victoria's husband." I invited them in, put on coffee, and listened as Rebecca's story unfolded. "I was Victoria's assistant for 2 years," she explained. "She's not the person she pretends to be. At work, she took credit for others' ideas, manipulated situations, and pushed blame onto innocent colleagues. She had this whole different personality behind closed doors." My hands shook as I set down my coffee cup. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw what she did to her ex-boyfriend's mother," Rebecca said quietly. Mrs. Harmon was a widow too, devoted to her son. Victoria systematically drove a wedge between them, isolated him from his family, even spread rumors that Mrs. Harmon was becoming unstable when she tried to speak up. "What happened?" I whispered. "Mrs. Harmon had a stroke. By the time she recovered, Victoria had already moved on. To your son, apparently." Mrs. Harmon never got to reconcile with her son. He still believes she tried to sabotage his relationship out of jealousy. Eleanor reached for my hand. Rebecca came to me because she saw the same pattern starting again. She tried warning James anonymously a few months ago, but Victoria convinced him it was just a jealous colleague, Rebecca finished. She's very good at getting ahead of the truth, painting herself as the victim before anyone can prove otherwise. As Rebecca spoke, more pieces fell into place: the isolation, the subtle undermining, the way Victoria had positioned herself as the reasonable one while painting me as emotional and outdated. "There's more," Rebecca said, pulling out her phone. "Victoria's been writing a blog about her country mother-in-law nightmare. She's careful not to use real names, but..." She handed me the phone. The screen showed a blog called City Girl, Country Nightmare. The latest post was titled, "When Your Mother-in-Law is Stuck in the Last Century." The accompanying photo was of my kitchen, slightly blurred but unmistakable, with a mocking caption about prehistoric appliances and quaint ignorance. Post after post detailed Victoria's suffering at the hands of her backward mother-in-law, who supposedly tried to control her son through guilt and manipulation. She'd twisted every interaction, every word I'd spoken, painting herself as the sophisticated victim of my rural closed-mindedness. "She has thousands of followers," Rebecca explained gently. "She's building a whole brand around being the modern woman surviving toxic family traditions." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had Victoria worked to destroy my relationship with my son in private, but she'd been publicly mocking my home, my life, my values, turning my pain into entertainment for strangers. "Does James know about this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Rebecca shook her head. "Victoria's careful to keep her online presence separate from her home life. She uses a pseudonym, and James isn't big on social media." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Martha, you need to show him. All of it. The blog, Rebecca's story, the forged signature. It's time." But I hesitated, remembering the pain in James's eyes when he'd begun to suspect the truth about Victoria. Could I really be the one to shatter his world completely? As if reading my thoughts, Rebecca leaned forward. "Mrs. Williams, I watched Mrs. Harmon lose her son because she tried to spare his feelings. Some truths hurt, but lies destroy." That evening, after they left, I sat with my husband's picture and asked what he would do. The answer came not in words but in a certainty that settled in my heart. The truth was finally coming to light, piece by damning piece, and I would no longer stand in its way. Sunday dinner had always been sacred in our family. From the time James was small, we'd gathered around this very table every week to share food and gratitude. After Victoria entered our lives, those dinners had become increasingly rare, then stopped altogether. So when James called asking if he could come for Sunday dinner, alone, I knew something significant had shifted. I spent hours preparing his favorites: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, apple pie cooling on the windowsill. My hands moved through these familiar motions while my mind raced with uncertainty. How much did he know? How much was I prepared to tell him? He arrived punctually at 5, looking exhausted but resolute. We ate mostly in silence at first, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between us. Finally, James set down his fork. "The real estate company confirmed it, Mom. Your signature was forged." His voice cracked slightly. "Victoria swears she didn't do it, says it must have been someone at the agency. But I don't." "I can't." I reached across the table to take his hand. "There's more you need to know, son." Slowly, I told him everything. The blog, Rebecca's story about Mrs. Harmon, the systematic campaign to isolate him from me and rewrite our family's story. I showed him printouts of Victoria's posts mocking my home and traditions. With each revelation, James grew paler, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock, to a grief so profound it broke my heart to witness. "How could I not have seen this?" he whispered. "How could I have let her treat you this way?" "Love blinds us sometimes," I said gently. "You wanted to believe the best of her. There's no shame in that." James stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the fields now bathed in evening light. I confronted her about the forgery yesterday. She got defensive, said I was choosing family land over our future. When I pressed her, she said— His voice faltered. She said you were manipulating me, using your simple farm woman act to control me. I remained silent, letting him work through his thoughts. So I started looking into things myself, he continued. I found receipts for jewelry I never gave her, a silver brooch with a pearl. He turned to face me. Mom's brooch, right? The one she borrowed? I nodded, and there were others, earrings, a necklace, all with notes about vintage finds for her blog posts. He shook his head in disbelief. She was stealing from you and bragging about it online. James, no, Mom, please. Let me finish. He returned to the table, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. I called Mrs. Harmon this morning. She cried when I told her who I was. Said she'd tried to warn me through a friend last year. The anonymous letter, the one Victoria had dismissed as jealousy from a former colleague. I've been such a fool, James said, his voice breaking. I let her come between us. I let her make me doubt you. The one person who has never, ever let me down. I rounded the table and pulled my son into my arms, this grown man suddenly feeling like the little boy who'd come to me with scraped knees and broken toys. We held each other, years of hurt and misunderstanding flowing between us like a river finding its natural course again. Later, as we sat on the porch swing watching fireflies emerge in the dusk, James asked the question I'd been dreading. What do I do now, Mom? I took a deep breath. That's not for me to say, son. But whatever you decide, know that this land, this home, your heritage, it's all still here. Some things can't be taken away no matter how hard someone tries. James nodded slowly. She's coming to Eleanor's shop tomorrow, some meeting about local artisans she wants to feature on her blog. She doesn't know I know anything yet. A plan was forming in his eyes. One that would finally bring the truth to light once and for all. What happened the next day would forever change the course of our family's story. Eleanor's craft shop sat at the heart of our small town, a gathering place for local artisans for over 30 years. Its walls were lined with quilts, hand-carved wooden items, preserves, and other products of country craftsmanship. It was the last place I expected justice to be served, yet somehow fitting, truth emerging in a space built on authenticity. I hadn't planned to be there for Victoria's humiliation. That hadn't been my intention. But Eleanor had called that morning, asking me to bring my newest quilt for a special display. Trust me, she'd said mysteriously. You'll want to be here at noon. When I arrived, the shop was unusually crowded. Rebecca stood near the counter, pretending to browse. Several local artisans whose work Victoria had mocked online were scattered throughout the store. And in the corner, partially hidden by a display of hand-thrown pottery, stood James. At precisely noon, the bell above the door chimed. Victoria swept in wearing a designer dress that seemed absurdly out of place among the handcrafted items. Her eyes widened slightly upon seeing me, but she recovered quickly. Martha, what a surprise. I thought you'd be busy with your gardening or whatever. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm here to discuss featuring some of these charming little crafts on my lifestyle blog. Isn't that exciting? Eleanor stepped forward. Yes, Victoria, we're all very interested in your blog. In fact, we've been reading it quite thoroughly. Victoria's smile faltered. You have? Oh, yes, Eleanor continued pleasantly. Especially the posts about the backward country mother-in-law and her prehistoric kitchen. Fascinating content. The color drained from Victoria's face as she realized she was surrounded by people who knew her secret. Her eyes darted to the door, but James had moved to block it. James! Her voice rose an octave. What are you doing here? I thought you had meetings all day. My son stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. I canceled them. Seemed more important to be here, especially after spending the morning with the district attorney. He held up a folder. Forgery is a felony in this state, Victoria. So is fraud. Victoria's composure cracked entirely. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. She jabbed a finger toward me. She's been trying to come between us from the beginning. She can't accept that you have a modern life now, away from this backward place. Rebecca emerged from behind a shelf. Hello, Victoria. Victoria froze. Rebecca? What are you? I've given James copies of all the emails, Rebecca said quietly. The ones where you detailed your plans to isolate him from his family. The ones where you bragged about manipulating Mrs. Harmon's son the same way. Victoria lunged for her purse, probably reaching for her phone, but Eleanor calmly placed a hand on it. I've also taken the liberty of saving copies of your entire blog, including the posts where you admitted taking, what did you call them? Oh yes, Hick family trinkets, to sell online. The truth crashed down on Victoria like a collapsing house of cards. She turned to James, switching tactics with the desperation of a cornered animal. Baby, they're twisting everything. You know how much I love you. We're building a life together, a better life than this. She gestured dismissively at the shop, at our community. Don't throw everything away because of some old-fashioned sentimentality. For a moment, the shop was utterly silent. Then James spoke, his voice quiet but unwavering. The land sale has been invalidated. The forgery investigation is ongoing. Your blog has been archived as evidence. He took a deep breath. And I've filed for annulment. Victoria's face contorted with rage. You can't do this to me. After everything I've done to elevate you from this nothing town. This nothing town is my home, James replied. These backward people are my family. And this woman, he moved to stand beside me, his hand on my shoulder, is my mother, who you systematically tried to erase from my life. Victoria looked around wildly, finding no sympathy in the faces surrounding her. You'll regret this, she hissed. All of you. I have connections. Your connections have already been contacted, Rebecca interrupted. Your publisher knows everything. So do the brands that sponsored your blog. With a final venomous glare, Victoria pushed past James and fled the store, the bell jangling discordantly in her wake. In the silence that followed, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what my son had lost. For the love he'd believed in that had proven false. I squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry, James. He looked down at me with eyes that had aged years and days, yet somehow seemed clearer than they'd been in a long time. Don't be sorry, Mom. Be proud. Your strength showed me the way back home. As word spread through our small community, people came to Eleanor's shop, not to gossip or gloat, but to stand with us in quiet solidarity. These were the people Victoria had mocked and belittled, whose craftsmanship she'd dismissed as quaint and outdated. Yet there was no celebration in their support, only the solemn acknowledgement that truth, however painful, had finally prevailed. That evening, James came home to the farm for the first time in months. As we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the fields gold, he asked softly, How do you do it, Mom? How do you face betrayal without becoming bitter? I thought carefully before answering, searching for the wisdom that had carried me through my darkest days. The secret, my son, is remembering that forgiveness isn't about freeing the person who wronged you. It's about freeing yourself. And despite everything, I had already begun the long journey toward forgiveness. 1 year has passed since that day in Eleanor's shop. The seasons have come full circle. The earth has yielded another harvest, and healing has grown in the furrows of our pain. James moved back to the farm temporarily while the legal proceedings with Victoria concluded. What began as a refuge became a rediscovery of the land that had shaped him, the community that had nurtured him, the traditions that had always been his birthright. Victoria left town immediately after her public unmasking. Her carefully constructed image crumbled as quickly as it had been built. Her blog was taken down, her publishing contract canceled. I heard she moved to another city, started over with a new name, a new story. Part of me hopes she found some measure of truth in the aftermath of her deceptions. The forged documents case was settled out of court. The family land remained ours, its boundaries intact, its heritage preserved for generations yet to come. But the greatest restoration wasn't of property, it was of trust. Each Sunday dinner, each shared task around the farm, Each quiet evening conversation slowly rebuilt the bridge between my son and me that Victoria had so methodically tried to dismantle. I keep thinking about how easily I was fooled. James admitted one evening as we shelled peas on the porch. How I chose her words over your silence, her manipulations over your steadfastness. Love makes us vulnerable, I told him. That's not weakness. It's what makes love valuable in the first place. Last month, James met Sarah, a local schoolteacher with honest eyes and dirt under her fingernails from the community garden she tends. She comes to Sunday dinners now, asks about family recipes, listens to stories of the old days with genuine interest. She's different from Victoria in every way that matters, not because she's from our community, but because her heart is authentic. When she admired my mother's brooch, still in its special box where it belongs, I watched James's face tighten with painful memory. But later, he told me, the past doesn't get to steal our future. Mom, you taught me that. This morning, I found James and Sarah planting apple saplings along the eastern fence, trees that won't yield fruit for years to come. A commitment to future harvests they may not live to see. Watching them, soil on their hands, sun on their faces, I understood the deepest truth I've learned through this ordeal. Manipulators can steal time, peace, even relationships temporarily, but they cannot take what is rooted so deeply that it becomes part of who we are. I survived Victoria, not because I fought harder, but because I was anchored in something true. The land beneath my feet, the love for my son, the community that stood witness to my life. These things cannot be erased by clever words or false narratives. They endure, silent but indestructible. For any mother facing the pain of watching her child misled, any person standing in the shadow of someone else's deception, I offer this hard-won wisdom. Truth doesn't need constant defense. Like water, it may be diverted for a time, but eventually finds its level. Being underestimated was painful. Being sidelined was lonely. Being mocked was humiliating. But in the end, these were the very things that revealed Victoria's true nature. My apparent weakness became my greatest strength. Today, as I work alongside my son in fields our family has tended for generations, I am grateful not just for the restoration of what was nearly lost, but for the deeper appreciation we now have for what was always ours. Have you ever stood silently by while someone tried to rewrite your story? Have you chosen dignity over drama, truth over temporary victory? Share your experience in the comments below. For sometimes the most powerful vindication comes not from fighting back, but from standing firm until the truth reveals itself.